Bonjour, bonjour. Bonjour, vous m'entendez maintenant?
Oui, je te capte très bien.
Ok, très bien. Maintenant que je vous entends, je n'entends plus euh, la présentatrice. Donc, ce sont des problèmes techniques pour l'instant.
So Esther, I can still hear the communication from the interpreters.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Bonjour,
My name is Kankunda Esther
je
from
m'appelle
Uganda.
Esther de l'Ouganda.
I'm the executive director at Tabara Cancer Foundation. Happy to be part of this meeting and hoping to learn and get to know more people from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Esther Adelusi.
Okay, yeah, I think there was a glitch around there. You can
Yes.
continue. You can continue. The interpreters are sorting at the back end. So maybe just once in a while you might hear their voice. They are trying to move from the English speaker, channel to French. So that's why there's a little glitch.
All right. All right, so I can see people are introducing themselves. Please, let's continue the introduction. I'd also like now to welcome Dr. Olumide Ajayi, the Executive Director of the African Leadership Foundation, to give his opening remarks for the next 5 minutes. Dr. Ajayi, please welcome.
Our moderator this afternoon. The Madam Victoria Maluka, the head of an outreach division of the African Union Women's Gender and Youth Directorate. Madam Victoria Kingston, the second vice chairperson of the African Parliament Women Caucus. Dr. Grace Caballo, the Secretary General of the Pan-African Women's Organization. Professor Chuse Kesi, who is the Dean of Humanities, University of Cape Town, South Africa, and our sister, Chim Wemwe Fabiano, Women's Political Leadership Lead from Akinamama, Africa. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to gather today in the spirit of reflection on the history of Africa, the actions and the inactions, justice and injustice experienced by women, and how civil society organizations, institutions, government, and other entities have contributed to gender justice in Africa. This year, we celebrate the International Women's Month under the global theme for all women, girls' rights, equality, empowerment. We are looking at it through the lens of the African Union's theme of year 2025, justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations, and interrogating how women and girls in Africa can benefit from reparative justice. This connection is intentional because we cannot genuinely achieve gender equality without addressing the deep-rooted historical injustice that have disproportionately affected African women and girls for centuries. Our dialogue today remains an important part of history and development of Africa, as reparative justice transcends merely acknowledging the past harm and legacy of slavery, colonization, and entrenched patriarchy, which continue to manifest in economic disparities, restricted access to land and leadership, and widespread gender-based violence that women endure on a daily basis. As we engage in today's discussion, we also recognize and build upon the work of those who paved the way for Africans' reparations movement. I would like to personally acknowledge and remember Chief Moshood Kashimawo Olabiwonu Abiola, a true visionary who was among the first African leaders to champion the cause of reparation for the continent. His efforts laid the groundwork for the global dialogue on justice and compensation regarding African historical exploitation. Today, we honor that legacy by centering women in this conversation because reparative justice must be gender responsive to be truly transformative. Our dialogue today is not merely about conversation, it's about action. The insights from our distinguished speakers will support our national parliaments to commence national dialogues on reparative justice for women. Also, the key recommendations will be synthesized to a brief, which will, of course, will be shared with the African Union Commission and relevant stakeholders. I believe we will engage deeply, ask bold questions, and push for actionable solutions. Let today's conversation be a catalyst for sustained efforts that will bring Africa closer to justice, not just for women and girls, but for the entire generation to come. Thank you once again, everyone that has been here. I look forward to a powerful and enlightening dialogue. God bless you and good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi, for keeping it simple and succinct, and helping us save a bit of time, which we have lost at the beginning of the conversation. So without much further ado, I would like for us to get into the conversation. And we will have 2 sessions with different speakers across the different sessions. And the first discussion will be looking at reparative justice for women, demystifying the concept, context, and paths forward. Our speakers for this session will be Miss Victoria Maloka, who is the head of Coordination and Outreach Division at the African Union Commission Women, Gender and Youth Directorate. Victoria, are you online? And let me know you are able to speak.
Good afternoon, Madam Moderator. Please, may you confirm that you can hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you well.
All right. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. We are in East Africa, so it is already late in the afternoon, but for those connecting from other parts of the continent, could be good morning or good day. It's really great to be here. Madam Moderator, I would like to stand on the protocols already established by Dr. Ajayi, but really just to congratulate the Africa Leadership Foundation for organizing this important dialogue, and really to thank Dr. Ajayi for his leadership. We know that he is one of the men in the continent, a he for she, but also a positive masculinity champion that we have worked with in this gender equality and women's empowerment agenda. And yeah, so really it's very exciting that we are here, and really, Madam Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly delighted to join you in this important dialogue as we celebrate International Women's Day and International Women's Month. And congratulating again the Africa Leadership Foundation for convening us. And really, this theme of today's dialogue, promoting reparative justice for women and girls in Africa, is very important. And as Dr. Ajayi has already indicated, it's very much aligned with the AU's theme for 2025 of justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. We are all aware that throughout history, African women and girls have experienced systematic violence, discrimination, exploitation from colonial subjugation, economic marginalization, and patriarchal oppression, which really have left a legacy of injustices that we continue to see today, and it continues to manifest in contemporary societies. These injustices have really deprived African women of economic opportunities, some even political opportunities, stripped them of their dignity and agency, and subjected the women to relentless forms of violence. Today, African women, as you'd know, continue to face alarming rates of domestic violence and sexual exploitation, human trafficking, economic disempowerment, and so on. And that is why the subject of reparative justice for women and girls is so important and very, very relevant for today, for Africa today. And so I'll just really attempt to speak a little bit on what reparative justice is. First, it's really an acknowledgement, among others, of course. It's an acknowledgement of past inequalities and restoration of one's dignity to repair the damage inflicted by structural inequalities, historical oppressions and systemic violence, and really for African women and girls, reparative justice demands that we address, among others, violence against women and girls to ensure that women and girls are healed, are empowered, and fully participate in the socioeconomic and political life of our nations. We know that reparative justice is important. It matters for women, and here are just a few whys. It matters because it challenges systematic and systemic inequalities, addressing structural barriers such as discriminatory laws, limited access to justice, and underfunded support services. Reparative justice matters because it centers survivors' voices and addresses their unique needs for healing, redress, empowerment, and for accountability. It matters because it recognizes the intersecting vulnerabilities of women and girls living in poverty, in conflict zones, in rural areas, and within marginalized groups. Reparative justice matters for women in Africa, for girls in Africa, because it propels us towards gender equity and inclusive development, ensuring that no one is left behind in the pursuit of justice, peace, and prosperity. So I'll also just speak a little bit, Madam Moderator, Excellencies, dear colleagues, on what we believe reparative justice is not. Yeah. One, reparative justice is not merely about financial compensation. It really goes beyond that. But it also goes beyond punitive or retributive justice. It builds. It seeks to build. Yeah. We also believe that reparative justice is not merely about righting the wrongs of the past. It's about building a future where women and girls can thrive, free from fear, free from violence and oppression. It is also, it's about rewriting the narrative of African women as agents of change, innovation, and leadership. And lastly, reparative justice is not merely, a moral obligation. We know that it's important, but it is not only that, but it's also very, very critical to the advancement of Africa's development aspirations. So what is the African Union doing, and in particular the African Union Commission doing in response to this? Many of you would know already that during the recently passed summit in February, the AU adopted a convention on ending violence against women and girls. And really this represents a watershed moment in Africa's human rights architecture. The convention is a landmark commitment to ending violence against women and girls in both public and private spheres, including cyberspaces, workplaces, and communities in all spheres of life. The AU convention is really at the core of the reparative justice agenda of the AU. And I'll give you a few things, and hopefully when the convention is online. You'll be able to access it and read it. At the moment, it's still undergoing legal, excuse me, and it will be published hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But let me speak a little bit to how the convention is our contributions to the reparative justice agenda, and really not even just contributions, but the core of the AU's reparative agenda, a reparative justice agenda. Firstly, the convention takes a very comprehensive legal approach by criminalizing all forms of violence against women and girls. This ensures that survivors has unquestionable access to justice, while perpetrators are held fully accountable for their actions. By embedding these legal safeguards, the convention aligns itself with one of the most fundamental principles of reparative justice, ensuring that harm is acknowledged, number one, addressed and rectified through formal mechanisms of redress and accountability. Secondly, beyond criminalization, the convention prioritizes survivor-centered justice by mandating the establishment of holistic support systems. And really, this includes legal aid, psychosocial counseling, protection measures, and safe spaces, all of which are essential for survivors to reclaim their sense of security, their sense of dignity and agency. Reparative justice is not merely, as we have indicated, about punishing perpetrators. No, it's equally about restoring and empowering survivors, allowing them to heal in an environment that respects their dignity and experiences. Thirdly, the convention goes beyond immediate response mechanisms and recognizes that prevention is integral to justice. And true justice is not merely retrospective, it is also proactive and transformative. And the convention therefore mandates efforts to engage cultural and religious institutions, challenges and dismantle harmful social practices, and empowers communities to actively reject and prevent violence. In doing so, it operationalizes one of the most forward-thinking aspects of reparative justice, the notion that justice must work to eliminate the conditions that enable violence in the first place. And ultimately, and Madam Moderator, I'm about to wrap up. The convention does not merely seek to punish wrongdoing, as we have already mentioned. It aims to rebuild trust, restore dignity, and reshape social structures in a way that ensures a future free from violence. And in this case, where the convention is concerned, the true reparative justice requires, therefore, that governments and international organizations and civil society organizations and everybody commit to meaningful change. And this includes implementing policies that dismantle discriminatory structures, ensures access to opportunities and resources for women and girls, and holding perpetrators of violence accountable. Justice must not only be seen as an abstract concept in this case, it must be realized in the everyday lives of African women and girls. And really in this regard, again, it is clear that for reparative justice to really be meaningful, as far as the convention is concerned, we can't talk about the convention without it being ratified so that it comes into force. So really for reparative justice to move from principle to practice, the ratification of the AU Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls must be prioritized by all AU member states so that it comes into force. And then once it is in force, then it is followed by concrete actions to integrate it into provisions of our domestic laws, and that it is formally implemented and really so that the women and girls of the continent can get to enjoy the benefits that comes with the convention. Now, I would not have done my job if I do not leave a call to action in this meeting, because it's really, really important. We have a convention, but it needs to come into force as quickly as possible. Now, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let this dialogue really be a rallying cry for all of us. Let it ignite a movement to ensure that every country, every member state in Africa not only ratifies the convention so that it comes into force, but that it ratifies, it domesticates and implements the convention. Let us invest in survivor-centered justice. Let us challenge harmful patriarchal systems and commit ourselves to a continental agenda that places African women and girls at its core. So for each and every one of you who is in this meeting, who are in this very, very important dialogue, take the baton, take this baton, go to your ministers of justice, go to ministers of foreign affairs, go to ministers of women. Pan-African Parliament is here. Go to your parliaments and really advocate for the ratification of the convention. Let us create history together and ensure that the convention comes into force in the quickest way, more like faster than any other instrument in the convention. Colleagues, excellencies, reparative justice for African women is non-negotiable. And this convention brings it represents that for us. It's a collective responsibility, and it is long overdue. So really, as the AUC, we stand ready to continue working with you as a partner in reparative justice, and also as a partner in ensuring that the convention becomes a living document for all women and girls in the continent. So thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. God bless you and God bless Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for that passionate submission. I think one of the most powerful things I've gotten from your presentation is that reparative justice is not just retrospective, it is transformative. And thank you so much also for grounding and telling us the work that the African Union is doing to make sure that really we have concrete actions around the conversation around reparative justice. Thank you so much, Ms. Victoria. I would like to encourage speakers to please put your questions on the chat as we continue to engage in this very important conversation. I want to invite our next speaker, who will be actually analyzing for us the historical injustices and gendered impact of how slavery, colonization, patriarchy has shaped inequalities today. And I would like to invite Professor Chose Kesi, who is the Dean of Humanities at the University of Cape Town. Professor, are you online and can you hear me?
I am. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Yes, please proceed.
Sure. Good afternoon, colleagues and distinguished guests and fellow speakers. I want to just start by thanking Dr. Ajayi and the organizers for inviting me to present at this very important event on the occasion of International Women's Day 2025. It comes with both a huge honor, but also an immense responsibility. The task to address reparative justice for women in Africa is a big one. And my topic is historical injustices, gendered impact, how slavery, colonization, and patriarchy shaped today's inequalities. And so I will pick up on Victoria and speak about violence against women mostly, and how the historical roots of that violence and the possibilities, if I have time, for addressing it. And I just want to note that it's important to note that this year's dialogue aligns with the African Union's theme of 2025, which the previous speaker already mentioned, that is justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations, and also to note the very important AU Convention on violence, to end violence against women. So with all of these efforts and many others, which we don't have time to list, we are devastatingly plagued by complex and multi-layered forms of gendered violence in Africa. So this talk will try and unpack these complexities and layers to account for the present and also offer possible solutions and their limitations for the future. So according to World Bank statistics, 35% of women worldwide have experienced some form of gender-based violence. And although the true extent of violence against women and girls on the African continent is largely out of view, taken for granted or hidden, the available evidence suggests equally problematic high levels of violence. Women and girls' vulnerability to violence are amplified during experiences of civil unrest, war, and crises. And this vulnerability manifests in increasing sexual and other forms of violence against women and girls, including rape, sexual slavery and exploitation, trafficking, and intimate partner violence. Displacement and migration also result in increased vulnerability for women and girls who may be subjected to intersecting forms of violence based both on xenophobia and gender. The ways in which these different forms of violence, inequality, and discrimination manifest are a function of a range of historical and structural conditions that permeate contemporary lives. There is little doubt that neoliberalism and globalization, or what Hussein Boulan calls meta-colonialism, has inevitably shaped the lives of many on the economic margins, particularly women. Women continue to be trapped in low-paying, low-skilled, informal and exploitative forms of labor and temporary work, making the economic empowerment of women, which is a key determinant of living free of violence, ever more elusive. Arguably, the most familiar and recognizable legacy of coloniality and imperialism is the structural dimension. And I'm going to speak specifically about three dimensions, or this is what I'm arguing, that three dimensions of how the legacies of slavery, colonization, and patriarchy have shaped the structural dimension of current gender inequalities. So the first dimension is the scientific project of colonization. The second is the creation of the nation state. And the third being the construction of women through the development discourse. So first, feminist theorizing on coloniality has recognized that slavery and colonization were both a racialized and gendered project with the purpose of cementing patriarchal ways of being and seeing. Colonial racist discourse involved the hypervisibility and disposability of Black bodies, Black women's bodies in particular, and created and reinforced stereotypes about Blackness and sexuality through a project of scientific racism that took hold across a range of colonial contexts. We know, for instance, the story of Sarah Baartman, who was taken to Europe as a slave in 1810 and was stripped of her dignity in the name of science. 19th and early 20th century scientific studies defined Blackness as inferior and deviant, resulting in very real and oppressive practices of segregation, often enshrined in colonial laws and reinforced by forms of physical and psychological violence. For example, the forced sterilization of Black women, which was common during colonization. The scientific project was thus complicit in the legitimization of slavery and colonization by constructing Africans, and especially African women, as less than human. These ideas still circulate today, as can be seen through many forms of discrimination, such as sexual harassment in the workplace or high levels of gender-based violence and femicide. The second domain is the nation state. So colonial rule also introduced classical Western theories of the nation state. Fixed identities of woman and man were reinforced through socially constructed roles where women and the family are located in the private domain and men are located in the public domain. And this has implications for citizenship status. So while men have been able to participate fully in formal political life, acting as representatives of the family and of the family unit, women often needed, and in certain places still do, needed permission from male relatives for access to certain rights, such as property and land ownership. Hence, women's access to citizenship and political rights, such as property, has been more volatile and reflecting, as Jackie Alexander says, the imposed epistemic opposition between woman and citizen that was characteristic of colonial relations of rule. So this division cemented violences against women whose subordination and sexual behavior is the basis on which the social order is maintained. So it's important to know how contemporary African nations have been regulated by the idea of the nuclear family unit, along with the customary legal and religious principles that determine its formation. So despite their exclusion from political life, women play a crucial role in the reproduction of the nation. So whether it's biological reproduction, but also cultural reproduction, given that women are mostly the caregivers and therefore the transmitters of language and other customs. So the control of women and women's bodies thus becomes the basis for maintaining the social order and producing the nation or the nation state. So indeed, violence against women and violence against individuals who do not conform to traditional gender roles and identities are commonplace across our continent. Women operating outside of the boundaries of imperial heteropatriarchy, which has now become part of the fabric of our own national consciousness, are subjected to discipline and punishment. So women's absence or pathologized presence in nationalist movements can be seen through their depiction as, and this is a quote from Joanne Nagel, icons of nationhood to be elevated and defended, as the booty or spoils of war to be denigrated and disgraced. The real actors are men who are defending their freedom, their honor, their homeland, and their women. And the third area I want to discuss is the development discourse. So contemporary development discourses are heavily reliant on simplistic, binary, heteronormative, and economic-based interpretations of gender and sexuality. And such assumptions perpetuate colonial ideas of third world, so-called third world women, as sexually constrained, ignorant, poor, passive, uneducated, tradition-bound, religious, domesticated, family-oriented, and victimized, and the list goes on. So this neoliberal development discourse relies on simplistic notions of empowerment and positions the helpless African woman or girl as someone who needs saving by white philanthropists or white feminists. And at the same time, this development discourse and its focus on the empowerment of the poor African woman and child can be read along the lines of the same colonial discourse meant as a civilizing project of Africans as the other, exotic, uncivilized, and barbaric. So taking these three dimensions together, African feminist theorizing has recognized that addressing gender inequality and promoting gender justice cannot be accomplished without an acknowledgement of questions of neocolonialism, imperialism, patriarchy, and exploitation, and how they may be linked to anti-racist, anti-capitalist, and decolonial struggles against continuing gendered inequalities. There's ample scholarly research from decolonial African feminists that demonstrates the coloniality of gender in Africa being shaped through violent structures that account for normative gender identities today. And I think these colonial administrative systems created categories that stubbornly persist even in the post-colonial states in Africa, often uncritically for the most part. There's also a need to be an appreciation of the ways in which colonial systems have merged with local indigenous social structures, creating differently structured heteropatriarchies embedded in complex genealogies, economic systems of trade and survival, as well as political and spiritual structures of society. So the attempts by such a gathering today, I think, are really great and commendable because it demonstrates a commitment to break from this path. Contemporary gender inequalities are a manifestation of structural inequalities, of cultural and political domination and oppression, and of signification that is shaped by a history of racialized gendered violence. I think I was muted. Is that a sign that I need to wrap up?
You have 1 more minute, but I don't think it was intentional. So I will just ask you to wrap it up, Prof. I could listen to you the whole day.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. I overdid it. So I wanted to say something about reparative justice, but maybe just to say that reparative justice approaches need to address these historical and structural legacies. And so often when we talk about violence against women and girls, you know, there's different levels of intervention that focus on individuals and families. And so these kinds of programs, although they're important, they need to also shift towards more approaches that really focus on the structural and historical context. I'm proposing that a decolonial feminist framework for addressing violence against women and girls can assist with that. And also thinking that maybe just to end by saying we need to rethink, you know, what we understand as gender-based violence or violence against women and girls. And we need to really think about these issues as crimes against humanity. And until we get to that place, I think a lot of these interventions will be lacking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that very intellectually stimulating labor of work. And I think what was very interesting in your presentation is really the anchoring of the three areas of analysis, which is the scientific project of coloniality, but also how our countries have, embedded this colonial identity within how we structure family, how we structure gender, but also the construction of the identity of the African woman within these confines of coloniality. Thank you so much for that submission. I'll still continue to encourage participants to send their questions, comments on the chat. So I would like to move on to our next speaker, who will be speaking on behalf of Dr. Grace Caballo. And this is Emily Akulu, who will be speaking to us on the emergence of the PAWO, which is the Pan-African Women Organization, as a response to historical injustices against women and girls. Grace, are you online and can you hear me? Please join the call.
Sure. Thank you very much. My name once again is Emily Akulu. I'm the Executive Secretary to the Secretary General of the Pan-African Women's Organization. I bring great apologies from her, but as well, Gladness. She's excited to have been invited for this conference. She brings apology. Being a Women's Week, a Women's Month, it's not been easy for women leaders around the world. They're running up and down. So she says she cherishes this vision and this what you're doing, and she appreciates. So she asked me to stand in for her. So well, you ask us to present on what power. You ask us to present on what power's response is to historical injustices against women and girls in Africa. I would like to highlight a few. First of all, the Pan-African Women's Organization was officially launched in 1962 in Tanzania by His Excellency Julius Mwalimu Kambarage, the president of Tanzania then. It's in recognition to the contribution of visionary women who realized a need to unite the sisters from all African countries to play their part. These women built closer relationships, shared experiences, losses, and victories as they struggled for independence, and also addressed other common challenges. Power contributed a lot towards the independence and decolonization of Africa, the continent, leading to total liberation, and unification of the African continent. It was key in the advocacy for the formation of the Organization of the African Union, the current AU, and the elimination of apartheid in most especially in South Africa, fought the abuse of human rights of the African people globally, and standing for the African cultural norms and values were some of the most important things that POWER did and is continuing to do. After most African countries became independent, POWER embarked on socioeconomic development to improve the lives of African people, giving priority to peace and security. Particularly to peace and security, the POWER language is silencing the guns. POWER knows that guns have sounded from colonial times, from the slave trade days, and POWER is saying, in all of this, women are the ones who are suffering and children. So POWER is saying, can we silence the gun? It's in the same vein that POWER advocates for inclusion of women in negotiations and activities that bring peace to the African continent. And so, so POWER contributed in an advocacy for health, agriculture, education, gender parity, among others, while upholding the Pan-African ideologies. The good cultural norms have been the pride of Africa, and Africa wishes to retain those norms and discard those that dehumanizes women and girls and children and the people in the continent of Africa. POWER is a global organization with six regional offices in Africa. And of course, one of them being the headquarters being in Pretoria and having regional offices elsewhere in Africa. And then also we recently were given an office in the AU headquarters, and want to thank the African Union specifically, because now that becomes a better coordination center. Together today, we bear the weight of history to confront the enduring legacies of slavery, colonialism, and patriarchy. This is not a conference of remembrance alone, but a call to action, a demand for reparative justice. We are here to acknowledge the profound gendered impact of historical injustices and to chart a course towards healing and transformation. For too long, the narrative of slavery and colonization have been told with blind spots to the experiences of women. Women, particularly women of African descent, were not simply passive victims. They endured unique and horrific forms of violence, sexual exploitation, like Professor mentioned, forced reproduction, the dismantling of their traditional roles, and the erasure of their cultural knowledge. If you read now, there is a deliberate effort to take away the literature that says that African women were initially leaders, even cultural leaders, in their own sex. And African women also contributed in the decolonization process of Africa. Even in the slave trade era, the women defended their families and their neighbors against these slave traders. But that is not recognized in most continental presentations. It is said Africa is a dark continent. So POWER strives to retrieve such histories to show that Africa is coming from somewhere and that Africa is a human space where people have been living before the arrival of religion, before the arrival of our colonial masters that came and said African women were in non-existence. The trauma of this era did not end with abolition of independence. It has echoed through generations, manifesting in the economic disparities, systematic violence, and cultural marginalization that women continue to face today here in Africa. And let's be clear, This is not solely a matter of historical grievance, but patriarchy, the insidious system of male dominance, has served as the bedrock upon which slavery and colonization were built. It continues to perpetuate gender inequality, silencing women's voices and denying them fundamental rights. We are here to say enough is enough. Reparative justice is not simply about financial compensation, through that may be a part of it. It's about truth-telling and acknowledgement. We demand that the historical records be corrected, that the experiences of women be centered, and that the crimes of the past be acknowledged. Here in Uganda and Africa, and all over Africa, we need to talk about the sexual violence, the loss of land, and the forced cultural changes that were carried out under colonialism. Restoring dignity, we must work to restore the dignity of women who have been marginalized and oppressed. By so saying, I am saying that power works around these areas to support systems that are working against these injustices to do their best. This means challenging harmful stereotypes, promoting women's leadership, and valuing their contributions. Addressing systematic inequalities is one of the things that power is working on. We must dismantle the systems that perpetuate economic disparities and violence against women. This includes reforming laws and investing in education and healthcare and challenging patriarchal norms. Power works hand in hand with the rest of the regional offices to check governments and systems and how they're working. Being that power is a continental organization, with the regional offices that we have, we use the same systems to penetrate our justice systems and to penetrate our national parliaments so that policies can be made in favor of the vision of power mentioned as here mentioned. We also are working along cultural revitalization. We must support the revitalization of indigenous cultures and traditions, including those that empower women. And of course, as Africa, we accept that there were cultural practices that were not good, and those we aim as power and preach and advocate for their discardance. But we appreciate also the values and cultures that Africa has had alongside colonial systems that stood strong to discard them. We have had cultures like female genital mutilation. We have had cultures of child marriages. Those we say no, but we have also had cultural sexual education that were good for our children. In light of the pandemic, HIV and AIDS, there are values that we carried as Africans and were good. And we think that we should revive them so that we can save our generation from the effects of this scourge. We also aim at using community-led solutions to achieve our goals. We encourage our regional offices to be present in their communities. Sometimes the challenges are that interconnection between the regional offices make it hard for each country to be able to reach to the other physically. But we work a lot online, and also we have regional conferences and national events where power is always present. We must empower communities to develop their own solutions to address the legacies of historical injustices. We must listen to the voices of women on the ground and support their leadership. This is not a task of government or international organizations alone. It's a task of all of us. Activists, scholars, artists, community leaders, and individuals who believe in justice. All these values and all these things are the things that power talk about in their regional meetings, in the international conferences.
Sorry to interrupt you, but you have like roughly 1 minute. Yeah.
No problem. In Uganda, for example, we have a unique opportunity to lead the way. Let us draw upon the strength and resilience of our ancestors, the wisdom of our elders, and let us create a movement that demands reparative justice, not as a matter of charity, but as a matter of right. So power basically looks at advocating for the rights of women and children. And of course, the strength of power is being able to penetrate the national systems that make policies and laws. And also power is mentoring a lot of leaders into leadership. Power believes that if women are lifted and they're physically in the spaces where policies are being made, then they will be able to influence the environment around them and swing opportunities towards women's needs. And power is representing women at regional bodies like ECOWAS, like the East African Community, like ECOSOC. So we believe through those spaces, power is doing our best to make sure that those injustices connected to new colonialism, to slave trade, and colonialism is addressed. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for speaking on behalf of Honorable. We are very delighted to hear your remarks as you center the role of women in the formation of the African Union, as well as the fight for independence and against apartheid. I think sometimes history can be very edifying of the role of women in these processes. And thank you so much for reminding us that women in Africa have been part of the journey, part of the activism, and part of the labor for our freedom. So I would like to open it up because time has gone for just one question from the floor, and then we will have Esther Adelusi read us one of the questions from the chat. Esther, we can start with you as I wait to see who has raised their hand to either comment or ask a question.
Okay, during conflict, you are
Yeah.
correct.
Thank you, Felista. So we have a question from Lucy Opondo on the chat, and she says, during conflict and violence, what are the key psychological factors that perpetrators feed on to victimize their victim? And is there any solution or best practices to help reduce the impacts?
Right. Thank you so much. I think we can have either the professor or Maloka be able to answer that question.
Okay, so Madam Victoria has dropped out, so maybe Professor can help us with that question.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think that, violence is it's about power, right? So manifestations of violence can be very overt or they can be very covert, so like more subtle. In fact, in a lot of if we talk about, for instance, sexual harassment in the workplace, it's often actions that appear to be very normal and part of everyday interactions between people, because it's become so normalized. And then there's more very overt forms of violence, which like femicide or gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and so on. So there's a range of responses to your question, but I would say that how do we address violence? It also depends on what kind of violence that we're thinking about. So if we're talking about, and it has to happen at different levels. So of course we want to address violence at the individual level, I think Victoria spoke a little bit about involving survivors in addressing programming and interventions against violence. I think we should also involve men. But then there's also the kind of, if we're talking about sexual harassment in a workplace, and there's the whole institution that needs to change. And so that means addressing policies and practices that have just become normalized. And so that's a different kind of intervention. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Prof, for that. So because time is not on our side, I will proceed to the next session because also we have a speaker who might need to drop off earlier. So the next part of our conversation will be looking at reparative justice for women, demystifying the concept, context, and paths forward. And to help us in this discussion and looking specifically at the pathway of justice, economic, legal, and policy solution for addressing historical wrongs will be Ms. Chimwemwe Fabian, who is the lead for women's political leadership at Akina Mama wa Africa. Chimwemwe, welcome.
Thank you very much, Felista, for the fantastic moderation, but also for taking into account my plea. I would also like to thank the African Leadership Foundation for organizing this space. I think it was well positioned post our initial engagement in Addis on the sidelines of the AU Assembly, but also post the CSW 69, where we've been reflecting on the Beijing Platform for Action in terms of progress, but also way forward. And I do hope that we can continue with this momentum in different aspects, and I'm looking forward to the ongoing conversation. I would also like to acknowledge the speakers that have spoken before me. Especially one thing that I picked, for example, from Madam Victoria Maloka, was the aspect that justice must not be seen as an abstract concept, but that we must move from principle to practice, or emphasize on practice alongside principle. And of course, Professor Shose Kesi has given us a very good theoretical framework, if you like. Well, not just theoretical, but really just giving us a proper intellectual clarity around the place of the African woman and the continuum of violence that she has experienced, particularly at the onset of slavery, colonialism, and of course the ongoing imperialism that we continue to experience. So I was asked to speak on the pathways to justice in terms of looking at economic, legal, and policy solutions for addressing historical wrongs. And there are many different avenues that we can look at in order to be able to address these respective areas, or rather, there are many solutions, both including economic, legal, and policy that have been provided. So I chose to pick a few, and I think these few are practical issues and areas that we can pick on as respective individuals, thought leaders, and of course also as institutions. And one of the questions that I raised or that came to mind at the beginning of this year when I was reflecting on the AU theme for this year was, in what ways is our work, right? And so I was speaking more specifically about the work I do, but I was also asking it as a collective question. In what ways is your current work enabling the systems and structures of injustice, right? And in what ways can you begin to disable these systems of injustice? And specifically here, looking at the aspect of reparations. Reparations is not a new issue, as we all know. There are states, nation states and states that have received reparations, and a very good example is Israel. And we can, look into that, but there is a working mechanism currently, and Israel is compensated to the tune of 1 billion, I believe, dollars, if it's not euros, every year, rather euros, 1 billion euros every year by Germany. But it is not only Germany that is providing reparations to Israel. The UK and Britain rather, and the US are also involved in this process. And of course, reparations can take different forms. It's not always, in terms of monetary, a monetary solution, but it can also take forms in terms of infrastructure, grants that do not have conditions, but allow for a particular state or community to decide on how best to use that. So that's the first thing to consider. And then there is something that Dr. Ajayi mentioned, that this work has visionaries behind it, or rather, there's a lot of thinking that has gone into this process. We have the 1993 Abuja Proclamation, we have the 2001 Durban Declaration, we have the Accra Declaration on Reparations. And so in terms of policy solutions or legal solutions, they are there. And so there is need to connect the dots and build up on the work that has been done. Another way to look at it is to look at the work we're already doing and saying, in what ways can we ensure that it is substantially building up on this particular agenda? So here are a few examples of work that is being done that we can, weigh into and ensure that we are moving from principle or aspiration to practice. First and foremost is for us to be able to critically analyze the ongoing drivers of iniquity. And here we are looking at both iniquity in the domestic space, but more importantly, iniquity in terms of at a global level, right? So we do know that we have unjust global and economic political systems that betray Africa, or betray our nation priorities. And it is important, therefore, that international relations, for example, and here we can specifically look at the United Nations Security Council, is a space that African countries and Africa as a continent have an actual voice and are able to weigh into. And there is advocacy that has been done around that, and it's for us to have a common position, not just as member states, but also as CSOs and technical advisors that are usually involved in these conversations. The next thing I would want to highlight is taking a common position to advocate for the democratization of international financial institutions, which include the IMF, World Bank, and WTO, which were really created, right, around the Bretton Woods Institute project. And that project was not necessarily, or did not place Africa and African states at the heart of it, but we are more of, had a Eurocentric and in many ways Western interests at heart of it. And they were built on the history of colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism. It was really, how do we create a financial system that works for us? But that has become the norm. And with that comes the issues of debt, the imposition of austerity measures that then stifle our own national budgets, but also how we prioritize where we put our monies. And so there's a conversation there to be had, or rather we can weigh into conversations that are already underway and work that is underway, advocating for financial justice, advocating for a deconstruction of the global financial architecture, advocating that there should be a repeal of unjust tax regulations, advocating that we must tackle the illicit financial flows and the corporate tax evasion, again, which have been normalized. And we must appreciate that it is all of this that affects the quality and availability of public services in our respective countries. Public services are funded by government, and it is important that government is able to raise enough revenue in order to do that. Of course, we have a corruption problem, but if you take an analysis of illicit financial flows, a huge chunk of that of illicit financial flows is due to corporate corruption. And corporate corruption is couched in things like understating profits. Those that are accountants in the room or have worked in the corporate world who understand that, or you've done some work around financial management or studied around it, understating profits is actually a legal thing, but it is unjust when it affects a whole nation state or a whole country. And it is many multinational companies that benefit from understating profits. It is not our SMEs in our countries. It is not the woman selling clothes or makeup in one corner of the market. It is the multinational companies. It is profit shifting. Here we're talking about tax havens and all of that. Just to give some numbers to it, a 2023 study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development noted that 60 billion was being lost in terms of illicit financial flows. What is being done? We have the tax justice movement and work that is done around that. We have countries like Tanzania, which have taken it upon themselves to reform any colonial tax treaties, concessions, and usually these concessions are around natural resources and mining companies. They've taken it upon themselves to repeal that and ensure that the agreements that they have with multinational companies benefit them. And these are simple practices that we can take on, but also advocate to our respective policy makers to learn from in case they are not familiar. Another thing I would like to share is the UN Tax Convention, which was adopted just a few years ago. And currently there is a consultative process that is underway, and I'll share a link which we can also participate in. It is also just checking in with our respective parliaments, whether they're involved in these conversations, and if not, to raise awareness around that. The last 3 points I would like to make quickly is that ultimately it is about redressing the fact that redressing the issues around women and how they are disproportionately affected by climate change, disproportionately affected by the unpaid contributions to the global value chains. So for any value chain, at the end of it, there are laborers, and those laborers are predominantly women, or where women are involved, women are underpaid. And so looking at issues of fair trade, for example, is part of the reparations agenda. A lot has been spoken about violence against women and girls. And essentially then is to look at the policies that we have, which are very strong policies, the laws that we have, the convention that is being mentioned, and centering all of this in the reparations agenda. We also can't talk about the reparations agenda without including the voices of women, the experiences of women, and the expertise of women, so that the nuances that might be left out in the policy and negotiation processes are included. Final but not least is the decolonization of our education system. And I take webinars like this as part of that process, because not all the education will take place in our schools or in our curriculums, but as we engage in these kind of conversations, which in some ways are kind of public education spaces or public lectures, we are able then to decolonize our understanding of these systems and structures that we are part of. Professor Soshe talked about the world order. We are part of this world order, and we need to be able to critically engage and negotiate with it. Finally, is to say that essentially then, from what we have heard from the previous speaker, the reparations healing imperative is a multi-generational and transnational endeavor. It must involve all of us, grassroots, civil society organizations. The private sector also needs to be conscientized, and policymakers, so that we are able to create the Africa we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chimwemwe, for that submission. I think also for giving us tangible examples of where really when countries are intentional about reparative justice, they are doing it. And especially as we are in the context where there's so much pushback from former colonizers around the language of reparation, and also pushback around countries that are seeking reparations. And I think your framework has helped us do what it was intended to do, which is given us tools for to propel us from what is aspirational and from the principles of this to something that we can take to practice and action. I know you have to leave, but I want to thank you for this submission. Thank you so much. And also thank you for sharing the UN Tax Convention on the chat. For those who would like to engage with it, please use the link shared by Chimwemwe on the chat. Thank you so much, Chimwemwe. So I want to proceed to the next speaker, who will be speaking on the role of parliamentarians in securing reparative justice for women in Africa. And the speaker will be Honorable Victoria Kingston, who will be speaking on behalf of the Pan-African Parliament. Honorable Victoria, are you on the call? And can you hear me?
Greetings.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Greetings from Malawi, the heart of Africa. My name is Honorable Victoria Kingston. I'm a member of parliament from Malawi, but I'm also the second vice president of the Pan-African Women Caucus. And I bring greetings from the warm heart of Africa. It is an honor to address you today as we come together to discuss a critical issue that has long shaped the lives of African women, representatives, and as we commemorate International Women's Day 2025, we do so under the broader African Union theme, Justice for African and People of African Descent through Repatriations. This dialogue is a call to action, a moment to reflect on how we as parliamentarians can play an active role in securing reparative justice for women and girls in Africa. The need for reparative justice. For centuries, African women have borne the brunt of historical injustice, from slavery and colonial exploitation to systematic gender-based discrimination and economic disfranchisement. The impacts of these injustices continue to manifest today in the economic disparities, restricted access to education, land dispossession, and high levels of gender-based violence. Reparative justice is not just about acknowledging these harms. It is about creating actionable, transformative solutions to rectify these past wrongs and build a more just future. The role of parliamentarians in securing reparative justice. As lawmakers and the representative of the people, parliamentarians hold a unique and powerful position in shaping forces that drive reparative justice. Our role is not passive, it is proactive. We must take tangible steps to ensure that justice is not just an abstract concept, but a lived reality for millions of women across Africa who continue to suffer the consequences of historical and systematic injustice. One, legislative reforms. We must enact and strengthen laws that recognize and address historical injustice against women. Gender-responsive budgeting should be implemented to ensure that women benefit from reparative justice measures. And also, laws governing land rights, inheritance, and economic opportunities should be reviewed to eliminate discriminatory practices. And then the second point I want to share with you is the economic and social reparation. African government must commit to equitable economic policies that provide compensation and investment in women's empowerment programs. Financial reparations should be channeled into education, entrepreneurship, and healthcare access for all women. Social reparations must include reconciliation efforts, normalization, and truth commissioning that acknowledge and address the injustice faced by women. The third point I want to share with you is the accountability and monitoring. We must create parliamentary oversight committee to track progress on reparative justice initiatives. We should also collaborate with civil society organizations and women-led movement should be prioritized to ensure grassroots engagement and inclusivity. International and regional collaborations. African nations must work together to demand reparations from institutions and entities that historically profited from the exploitation of women. We must also strengthen our partnership with global human rights bodies, advocacy groups, and financial institutions to ensure reparative justice is not just a national conversation, but a global commitment. A call to action. Colleagues, securing reparative justice for African women is not just a policy issue. It is a moral imperative. It is a responsibility that we must carry forward with agency, determination, and unwavering commitment. We must legislate with purpose to ensure that reparative justice is embedded in the national roads and governance structures. We must allocate resources to ensure women's economic and social empowerment. We must advocate beyond our borders, recognizing that reparative justice, it is a collective struggle that demands international solidarity. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to gender justice. We declare that the injustices of the past will not define the future of African women. As parliamentarians, we must stand as champions of justice, equity, and reparative transformation. Let us move from dialogue to action, from discussion to implementation. The women of Africa are not just waiting for change, they are demanding it. And it is our duty to deliver. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Honorable Victoria, for that submission and reminding us that the way forward is to collaborate and work together as parliamentarians, civil society, governments to be able to chart the way forward. So I know we have very few minutes before some of our panelists leave. So I'd like to invite Esther Adelusi to read some of the questions we have received in the chat and direct them to some of the speakers. Esther, can you hear me?
Yeah, Felista, thank you so much. I can hear you. And it's been a wonderful discussion. I know we have a lot of questions, some at the chat box, and some of us really want to speak. But I have a couple of questions here that I will want our speakers to address. And this one will go to Dr. Olumide Ajayi, the Executive Director and the convener of this dialogue. And the question is, how can reparative justice be effectively applied to address the rising sexual exploitation of women, ensuring not only legal accountability, but also long-term support and empowerment for survivors? Dr. Ajayi.
Thank you very much. I don't know who actually asked that question. And when Madam Victoria Maluka was speaking, she spoke about the convention. Having been part of one of the drafters of the conventions, I can tell you that these issues that you raise are fully taken care of within the convention. And it will be important for us all of us to begin to create awareness and advocacy program for member states to adopt or to ratify the convention. This issue in particular took us a long time, like some other issues, that sexual exploitation and redressing and empowering the victims be crafted and put inside the convention. I can assure you it's put inside. And I also want to respond to one of the issues that Prof raised about workplace. I don't know who says that she was one or somebody else. The issue around sexual exploitation and violence against women in place of work was also properly captured within the convention. So that's my response to you. So we all need to advocate for its ratification so that we can begin to enjoy some of the clauses and the articles and provisions of the convention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi. The next question would go to Ms. Chimwenwe Fabiano, the Women and Political Leadership Lead at Makinamama. The question says, is there restorative justice? Okay, how can, sorry, I missed that. How can this reparative justice be integrated into the priorities of government's programs? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of its implementation in a more fragile context, the case of conflict in the east of DRC? So I think she's talking about, she's using the conflict in the eastern part of DRC as an example, just saying that how can government prioritize reparative justice? How can they integrate it into programs, current programs that are going on?
All right, thank you for that question. To respond to that question, I'll address another question that I noted, which was around states of conflict and what can be done to ensure that women and girls actually do receive reparations. I believe that these two questions are interrelated. First and foremost, I would not say that there are any disadvantages to addressing the reparations agenda. And I think from the conversation we've had this afternoon, you will note that reparations is not a new subject matter. However, what we are doing is framing the conversation around our experiences of poverty as a continent, and we're speaking about the context of DRC specifically. We're talking about recognizing that the civil war, the conflicts that are in DRC, that are in the Sahel region, the insecurities we're experiencing are not caused by Africans, by Africans who refuse to understand each other. They are not simply caused by communities that have refused to understand each other. They're not just an issue of natural resources. They are external players in this process. And those external players have not started intervening in our situation today, yesterday, last year, 3 years ago. This is part of the colonial legacy. And so for us to even be able to start repairing our relationships, for us to even start to have any work around social cohesion, it's important that we receive reparations for the injustices we have been experiencing. Now, in many ways, that reparations agenda has already been ongoing, only that it's been done in bits and pieces. The development sector itself is part of the reparations agenda. The reason why they give us these grants is because they are trying to, it's part of saying, all right, Africa shouldn't be where it is. Here is $100,000. Here is $250,000. But that does not compare to what we lost during the slave trade, during colonialism, and the continuation of that. So essentially, we can only have meaningful change if we are holistically reparated, if there is holistic reparations, which means all countries in Africa, all nation states and the continent will receive reparations in a very holistic manner. It is not done in bits and pieces, right? And a good example is what I shared before about how Israel receives 1 billion euros every year, just from one country, not all the others. They are sure that that money is coming in, which means they can plan comprehensively on how they are going to move forward. And that's what we are asking, that's what we are demanding for as a continent, but also as nations. And then, therefore, How do we incorporate that into our conversation in DRC, for example, any conflict context? It's one that we ensure that where decisions, conversations are being made, where there is negotiations around, for example, ceasefire and what does peace look like, reparations would be part of that conversation. And reparations wouldn't just be the perpetrators, so the militia who we saw violating a woman, right? It is also those that funded the militia, and we know the militants, and we know that we've got mercenaries involved that are not just from, that are just not from the state, but that are actually being sponsored externally. So it's doing a comprehensive mapping and being able to say all these players are involved. If we then are able to frame this conversation just the way I've responded, you will note that you will not receive resistance from the members, from the government, because it's not the government that we're calling reparations for, but rather we're emboldening the government to be able to join hands with other governments of Africa under the African Union and take one stance and look at the different areas that we need reparations for. And of course, for DRC, it starts with the issues of natural resources, and then there is the wars themselves and other areas. Women then, right? Women that are well-informed and those that have just experienced, because well-informed doesn't mean you speak French well or you speak English well. It's that you understand what the issue is and what the solution is. Those women must be involved in these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chinwenwe, for doing justice to that question. Quickly, I move to another question. This is from Raphael from JRC also, and he's saying, are offenders encouraged or compelled to repair the damage caused by their acts in reparative justice? If so, how and when? And if not, why? I hope the question is clear. If Professor Chose is still on the call, she can give answer to that. The question is asking that offenders, are they encouraged or compelled to repair the damages that they have caused? And if so, how and when do they do that? And if not, why are they not compelled, or why are they not actually, why are they not considering reparative justice? Is Prof still on the call? Okay, I think she dropped off. So maybe Madam Emily can help us with that.
And then you should give it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I request you to rephrase the question again.
Okay. The question says, are offenders encouraged or compelled to repair the damages caused by their acts in reparative justice? All these discussions, is it that we are compelling offenders to, make amends? And if so, how are they making these amends? And if not, why is it that some persons or some offenders are going scot-free? That's what the question is saying.
I think first of all, the idea that reparative justice and what the offenders are doing to us has turned out to be a favor. In the Pan-African context, we believe that if you are offended, the person who offended you has to come with apology, and good apology, not intentional, with the intentional mission of pouring cold water in the heart of the person that you have offended. In other words, apologizing. But unfortunately, African governments and and the African people, when they come, it begins to look like it's a charity. It begins to look like it's a favor. And so our African governments need to stand up and ask for exactly what is right for Africa, so that it doesn't look like a favor, so that they do it in the right way. You see, like in the case of DRC Congo, that I would not probably like to comment a lot. There are lots of things happening in that country, and most of the people that are in the DRC Congo, which I cannot probably mention because I can't quote literature, is that The African people know that there are resources in the DRC Congo, but there are people coming to the DRC Congo saying they're going to help the DRC people. And they give money, but they go back with resources from that country. So is that reparative justice? Is that really giving Africa what Africa deserves? So it's a two-way thing. The negotiation has to be strong. It goes back to the question that somebody asked about injustices on women. What psychological things do they exploit? They exploit the vulnerability of women in these spaces because women are already vulnerable. In the same way, Africa is still vulnerable. But unless Africa stands up for its rights and knows that in whatever way I'm being assisted, it's what I had been offended for and it is what I really deserve as Africa, then we shall achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Emily. So that's all the questions from my end. I would hand over to our moderator. If we can take one or two contributions from the floor, then we go to our final reflection. Felisa, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther, for your support in going through the questions. So I'll open it up to two people who might want to share their thoughts or reflect on the conversation today. And I know a lot of you have been reflecting and putting your comments in the chat, and we have been very happy reading that as the conversation continues. So I'll give room to just two people. So you can raise your hand and then, yeah, you can proceed to make your comment. So I don't see any hands up, and I'm really aware that we started late and we need to really close now. So I imagine this has been a very wonderful conversation for you all, and you're marinating in some of the solutions and things said by the panelists. But I see Are Claudia has a hand up, so I will give her the chance to speak, and then we can come to you, Esther, for the final reflection. Claudia,
Thank
you can proceed.
Yes, thank you. Good day, everyone. Thank you very much, Felista, for the opportunity and this very important dialogue that is very central, particularly for a country like Cameroon, where I come from and where I am at the moment. Reparative justice is relatively a new it's a new area that is not being explored in Cameroon, despite the fact that we have an ongoing crisis that we may say it's somehow silent at the moment, but we still have injustices being perpetrated against women and against girls. And so I just want to say I'm glad that we have platforms like this where women, where young girls can engage and learn more about reparative justice and how they can engage as individuals, how they can engage through the movements that they are running or they are leading within their respective zones in Cameroon and across Africa. I've learned a lot today, and I do hope that the knowledge I've gained here, I can use back in Cameroon and within the context of my organization to promote the idea and the movement for reparative justice, especially in this context with the kind of leadership that we have, which is in complete denial of the realities of women and young people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia, for that submission, and very happy to hear that this has been very impactful in terms of learning for you. So Esther, you can proceed to give us an overall reflection of the discussion, and then of course we'll have Dr. Ajayi close the meeting. Esther, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Felisa. Thanks to everyone, our speakers, and everyone has contributed to this discussion. And as we come to the end of today's discussion, today's dialogue, two things that have actually stood out for me, or should I say that has brought to light the fundamental truth of the issues of reparative justice for women. And it is the fact that true gender justice cannot be achieved without acknowledging and addressing historical and systemic injustices that continue to shape the life of African women. And from the discussion of our speakers, I would like to bring out about 4 points that I think we should all take away from this discussion. And the first one is from the discussion from Madam Victoria Maluka, that reparative justice is not just about correcting the past. It is about transforming the future. It is about ensuring that women are economically empowered and that legal frameworks, most especially the Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, that has been recently adopted by the African Union of States, are used to shape policies at a national and continental levels. We also need to address historical and structural injustices perpetrated towards women, and we start to rethink what we understand by gender-based violence and start to see it as crime against humanity. Another thing is that we should do a critical analysis of drivers of inequality at all levels, even beyond the household, because we most likely just focus on gender-based violence, which of course it is beyond that. And then we should start advocating for the inclusion of women at decision-making levels of all sectors. And lastly, that we must develop a framework that effectively tracks Africa's progress on reparative justice initiatives. This is for the purpose of monitoring and ensuring that our governments are actually accountable to whatever we are doing regarding this. So in summary, we are all advocating for, what we are all advocating for is that the processes of reparative justice should not be gender blind, but it should be gender responsive. So on the note of that, I will hand over the baton to you while you call Dr. Ajayi to give the final recommendation. Thank you, Felisa.
Thank you, Esther, for that wonderful reflection, and of course, taking your time as the speakers for making the submission to take note of key reflections throughout the session. So I would like to invite Daktari, as we would say in Swahili, in reference to a doctor, Dr. Ajayi or Daktari Ajayi, please welcome and close this meeting for us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Felista, and thank you for moderating so well. And going forward, there are two major things we want to do. We want to use the content of this dialogue to begin to do some kind of advocacy around the continent on the way forward. And then secondly, we have a series of recommendations here that we're likely to share with stakeholders, with the AU, and some other organizations to work with us in continuing to give life to this reparative justice for women in Africa. First, we would like to call on the member states of the African Union to collaborate with their civil societies and organize national dialogue on reparative justice, to also develop roadmap to address internal historical injustice perpetrated against our citizens with more specific focus on women. Also, is to call on member states to ratify the Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and use it as an opportunity to redress and put a stop to gender GBV-related injustice all over the continent. 3 is to call on the Pan-African Parliament, as we have listened to conduct a special session on reparative justice and work with national parliament to provide appropriate legislative leadership in this regard. Number 4 is to call, and this is very important, coming from what discussion about today from Prof, also from Madam Fabiano, is to call on the African Union leadership to put up a strong diplomatic and advocacy agenda at the UN and other international platforms that will push for recognition, admission, and apology for the historical injustice perpetrated against African women and people of African descent, beyond the financial reparation but in an holistic manner and approach that Shiwewe had said to us. We should not keep quiet. We should not say we have discussed reparative justice as a theme of 2025. It should be an ongoing thing. And I'm challenging all the civil society here to not allow this to actually die. It's also, number 5 is to call African Union to develop like a protocol that protect African countries from external agencies and entities for perpetuating further injustice around our mineral resources, our natural endowment, including even our human resources. Number 6, we also want to call on member states to adopt a decolonial feminist framework in dealing with the issue of reparative justice among women and girls in Africa. We also want to call on for a unified African position in advocating for demystification of the global. In fact, it's not demystification, it is construction of global financial system, including reforming the IMF, repealing punitive tax systems, and its illicit financial flow coming from corporate corruption. Number 8 is to call on the member state to also deploy the existing legal and policy frameworks to interrogate the drivers of gender inequality and gender-based injustice coming from colonization and institutions that promote them. Number 9, we're also demanding for reform of African education curriculum to promote positive social norms that uphold gender equality and elevate indigenous knowledge and historical accurate narratives. We also, in addition, we asked the Parliament to do, we want the Parliament to also establish oversight mechanism to track reparative justice initiatives and collaborate with CSOs and women's rights organizations to ensure grassroots-driven solutions. Lastly, we want to call for institutional accountability and reparations from global entities that have historically contributed to injustice against African women and communities. These are the recommendations that we glean from this conversation, and I'm sure we are going to be working with Oxfam, with AU, with the Pan-African Parliament, and with AUC, I mean the African Parliament, to ensure that this also becomes reality. Thank you, Madam Moderator. You can close the meeting now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi. And before we close, I would like to thank the African Leadership Foundation for giving me this opportunity to be the moderator. I always value our partnership. And of course, you are one of our valued partners across the region in terms of our advocacy and collaboration around our work on women, economic justice and care. So I would like to thank all the participants for joining us today, for contributing, for engaging with the conversation. And I am officially closing the meeting and thanking all of you for showing up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, the group photo. Let's take the group photo.
Oh, yes, please.
Everybody should
put on their camera.
Put on your camera.
Yeah, switch on your camera so that we can take a group photo.
Okay, your camera off your camera. I mean, on your camera, sorry. On your camera, everybody.
It's a bit that's not showing.
Sabik that's not showing. Okay, we are ready to take now. 1, yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.